Forget all the fantasy stories. For 3 whole decades back in the 15th century, England tore itself apart in a real-life, brutal civil war. And the prize? The ultimate prize, the crown itself. This was a bitter struggle between 2 branches of the very same royal family, a conflict we now call the Wars of the Roses.
So what does this whole bloody mess really boil down to? It's all about this one question. What happens when the person in charge just isn't up to the job? When you have a weak king and powerful, ambitious families who all think they have a better claim? Well, let's dive into this incredibly chaotic time and see for ourselves.
All right, so here's our game plan. We'll start with how the conflict got started. Then we'll meet a major power player known as the Kingmaker. After that, we'll witness the rise and fall of the infamous Richard III, see how a totally new dynasty finally ended all the chaos, and, most importantly, understand why these wars still matter today.
Okay, let's set the stage. It's the mid-1450s. England is in a really bad spot. It's just lost the 100 Years' War with France, and morale is at rock bottom. And sitting on the throne is King Henry VI, a guy who was frankly more interested in praying than in politics. To make matters worse, he was suffering from these terrible bouts of mental illness, which left this huge, dangerous power vacuum right at the top.
So what was the actual argument about? It was all about the family tree, a giant royal family feud. On one side, you've got the ruling House of Lancaster. Their claim to the throne comes from the 3rd son of a previous king. Their whole argument is, the male line is all that counts. Simple. But then, you have the House of York. Now they're descended from the 4th son, but, and this is the kicker, they also have a claim through the 2nd son, just through a female line. And for a lot of people, that made their claim way strong.
And you won't believe how fast things went from a political crisis to an all-out war. In 1453, King Henry's mind just snaps. He's completely catatonic. So Richard, Duke of York, is called in to run the country. He's the Lord Protector. But then, get this, just as York is getting settled in, the king suddenly wakes up. He completely reverses everything York did and kicks him out of the royal court. York's response? He raises an army. The time for talking was officially over.
The first few years of the war were just this chaotic mess of back-and-forth fighting. But one man rose above it all to basically dominate the era, Richard Neville. He was the Earl of Warwick, and he was incredibly rich and powerful. In fact, his influence was so huge that history remembers him by one name, the Kingmaker.
And this period was just pure chaos. In 1461, Warwick helps put the Yorkist guy, Edward IV, on the throne. But a few years go by, and he has a huge falling out with the very king he created. So what does he do? He just switches sides. He invades England and puts the old Lancastrian king, Henry VI, back on the throne. It's nuts! But it only lasts a year. Edward comes back, kills Warwick in battle, and takes the crown again. It was like a decade-long game of musical thrones.
Oh, and here's a little fun fact for you. That famous name, the Wars of the Roses, the red rose for Lancaster, the white for York, nobody called it that back then. To them, it was just the Civil Wars. The much more romantic name that we all know and use today was actually made popular almost 400 years later by the novelist Sir Walter Scott. So after all that chaos, things actually settled down for a while under King Edward IV. But his sudden death in 1483 threw the whole kingdom right back into crisis, and it paved the way for one of the most controversial figures in all of English history to grab the throne, his own brother, Richard.
Richard's move to seize power was, it was shockingly fast and incredibly ruthless. His brother the king dies, and Richard is named protector for his 12-year-old nephew, the brand new King Edward V. But instead of protecting the kid, he has him and his little brother locked up in the Tower of London. Then he gets Parliament to declare his late brother's marriage invalid, which instantly makes the 2 princes illegitimate. And just like that, with them out of the picture, an assembly declares Richard the one true king.
And this right here leads to one of history's greatest, most chilling unsolved mysteries. After those 2 boys were taken to the tower, they were never, ever seen again. The question that has haunted people for centuries is, did Richard III have his own nephews murdered just to secure his throne? We'll probably never know for sure, but that one suspicion has defined his place in history for over 500 years.
Richard's time as king was short, and it was full of trouble. Grabbing the throne the way he did made a lot of enemies. And all that discontent created an opening,
an opportunity for one last contender to step out of the shadows and try to end these decades of war for good.
And his name was Henry Tudor. Now, on paper, this guy was a total long shot. He had spent most of his life as an exile in France, and his claim to the throne was, well, it was pretty weak. It came from a branch of the family that wasn't even technically legitimate at first. But he was the last man standing, the last real hope for the Lancastrian cause. So in 1485, it all comes down to this, the final showdown at the Battle of Bosworth Field. In the middle of the fight, Richard gets betrayed. Some of his most important allies just switch sides, right then and there. Seeing his army collapse, Richard makes one last desperate gamble. He spots Henry Tudor across the field and charges directly at him, trying to win the war with a single blow. But he's swarmed, pulled from his horse, and killed in the mud, becoming the last English king to ever die in battle. And right there, on the bloody battlefield, they took the crown from Richard's body and put it on Henry Tudor's head.
But look, winning the battle is one thing. Winning the peace is the real challenge. And Henry VII turned out to be a political genius. His first move was brilliant. He married Elizabeth of York, finally uniting the two warring houses. It was a masterstroke. And then he spent the next few years ruthlessly crushing any leftover rebellions to make sure everyone knew the Tudor dynasty was here to stay.
So the wars are over. A brand new family is on the throne. But so what? Why does this bloody, 3-decade-long fight from the 1400s still matter to us? What was the lasting impact?
Well, first, let's just think about the human cost, because it's absolutely mind-boggling. An estimated 105,000 people were killed. That was about 5.5% of England's entire population at the time. It was a catastrophic loss of life that wiped out huge chunks of the old nobility.
And the political fallout was massive. The Plantagenet dynasty, rulers for 300 years, was just gone. The Tudors were in charge, and with so many of the powerful old lords dead, the new Tudor kings could centralize power in a way no one had before. But maybe the most important consequence was the deep national scar it left behind, this collective trauma, this terror of what happens when there's any doubt about who should be king.
And that fear echoed directly into the next generation. Henry VII's son, the one we all know, Henry VIII, he was absolutely obsessed with having a male heir. And why? Because he grew up with the stories. He knew that a shaky succession could send England spiraling right back into the bloody chaos his father fought so hard to stop.
So, in the end, the Wars of the Roses did a lot more than just put a new family on the throne. They created a deep-seated political trauma that led to a new national obsession, the desperate need for a male heir. And it was that obsession, that fear, that would drive Henry VIII to break with the Catholic Church, to marry 6 times, and to change England forever.